1521 was a year when history stood at a crossroads. A year when distant continents that had once seemed like separate worlds began to collide and connect in ways that would never be undone. It was a year of collapsing empires, fractured faith, and daring voyages across uncharted seas. A year when events in Germany, Mexico, the Philippines, and the Balkans were all part of a single unfolding story, the birth of the modern age. In Europe, the year began with a crisis of faith. For centuries, the Catholic Church had been the unifying spiritual authority of Christendom. Its cathedrals towered over cities, its rituals governed daily life, and its popes wielded immense power not only over souls, but over kings and emperors. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were spreading. Corruption, indulgences, and the vast wealth of the Church had stirred resentment. And in 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther had lit a fire no one could contain. By nailing his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg, he challenged the very foundations of papal authority. His words, carried by the printing press, spread with lightning speed. Suddenly, taverns, universities, and marketplaces across Europe buzzed with debate. Was salvation something to be sold? Did the Pope truly hold the keys to heaven? By 1521, this was no longer a quiet theological dispute. It was a movement threatening to tear apart Christendom. That spring, Luther was summoned before the Diet of Worms, an imperial assembly presided over by the young, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, a ruler. Barely in his 20s, yet already burdened with governing an empire stretching from Spain to Austria, from the Americas to the Netherlands. The scene was electric. In a grand hall filled with nobles, bishops, and papal envoys, Luther stood before his books, accused of heresy and commanded to recant. Would he back down? Or would he defy the most powerful institutions of his time? Luther's answer echoed like thunder. Unless persuaded by Scripture and sound reason, he declared, he could not and would not recant. Here I stand, I can do no other. Whether those exact words were spoken or not, the message was unmistakable. Conscience over authority, Scripture over hierarchy. With that defiance, the unity of Christendom shattered. Charles V branded him an outlaw, but it was already too late. The printing press had carried his rebellion far beyond Worms. Communities across Germany and beyond embraced reform, breaking away from Rome. In 1521, the Protestant Reformation became irreversible, setting Europe on a path of division, war, and transformation. But while Europe fractured spiritually, across the Atlantic entire civilizations teetered on the brink of collapse. For centuries, the Aztec Empire had dominated Mesoamerica, ruling from its dazzling capital, Tenochtitlán, a city unlike anything in Europe at the time. Built on an island in a vast lake with temples piercing the sky, causeways stretching across the waters, and markets overflowing with goods from across the empire, it was a marvel of engineering and power. Yet in 1519, Hernán Cortés had arrived with a few hundred Spaniards, strange weapons of steel and gunpowder, horses never before seen on the continent, and an audacious dream of conquest. At first, the Spaniards were treated as guests, even as possible gods. Cortés captured the Emperor Montezuma, but soon faced furious resistance. In a desperate retreat known as La Noche Triste, the Spaniards nearly lost everything. But Cortés adapted. He forged alliances with indigenous peoples who resented Aztec domination. He rebuilt his forces, and with thousands of native warriors at his side, he returned to lay siege to Tenochtitlán in 1521. The siege was one of the most brutal in history. Spanish cannons tore through defenses, while brigantines on the lake severed supply lines. Famine hollowed out the city. Smallpox, carried across the ocean by the invaders, ravaged the population, cutting down warriors and civilians alike. For months, the Aztecs resisted, fighting with courage and desperation in streets that ran red with blood. But by August, Tenochtitlán was in ruins. the Aztec Empire had fallen. From its ashes, New Spain was born. This was not merely the conquest of a single city. It was the opening act of European domination in the Americas. From this moment forward, oceans would carry ships filled with silver and gold to Europe, fueling empires, wars, and revolutions. The conquest of Mexico in 1521 set the stage for centuries of colonization, cultural destruction, and global transformation. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, another drama unfolded upon the seas. In 1519, Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese navigator sailing under the Spanish crown, had set out to find a western route to the Spice Islands. His fleet braved storms and starvation, navigating through treacherous waters, now known as the Strait of Magellan. In 1521, his battered ships crossed an ocean no European had ever traversed, the vast, silent Pacific. After months of unimaginable hardship, they reached the Philippines. Here, Magellan sought not only trade, but souls. He baptized local rulers, forging alliances through Christianity. Yet ambition drew him into conflict. On the island of Mactan, Magellan underestimated the resolve of its people, led by their chieftain, Lapu-Lapu. In April 1521, Magellan waded ashore in armor, but the battle turned against him. Overwhelmed by defenders, Magellan fell, struck down far from the land of his birth. His body was never recovered. Though Magellan would not live to see the end, his expedition pressed on. In 1522, one surviving ship, the Victoria, limped back to Spain. The first circumnavigation of the globe was complete. For the first time in human history, a voyage had stitched the oceans together, proving the Earth's vastness and its unity. Oceans were no longer boundaries. They were highways of empire and commerce. And as Luther defied the Pope, as Tenochtitlán burned, and as Magellan fell in battle, yet another empire was rising in the east. The Ottoman Sultan Suleiman, soon to be known as the Magnificent, launched his first great European campaign. His target, Belgrade, the mighty fortress guarding the Kingdom of Hungary. In 1521, after a determined siege, Belgrade fell. This victory opened the gates of Central Europe. Christian rulers trembled. The Ottoman threat was no longer distant. It was pressing at the heart of the continent. For decades to come, the Habsburgs and their allies would battle to hold the line against Ottoman expansion. What makes 1521 extraordinary is not simply the weight of these events, but their interconnection. The Reformation weakened Catholic unity, just as Spain poured American silver into European coffers. That wealth financed wars against Protestant rebels and Ottoman armies alike. Magellan's voyage, though costly, opened the path for global trade networks that linked Europe to Asia and the Americas in a single system. The fall of Tenochtitlan marked the beginning of a colonial order that would transform demographics, economies, and cultures on a scale never before seen. Each of these stories could stand alone as a turning point, but together they show 1521 as the dawn of a new world, a world of global empires, fractured religions, and interconnected destinies. The defiance of a monk in Worms, the fall of a great American city, the death of an explorer in the Pacific, and the triumph of an Ottoman sultan, all unfolded in a single year. The consequences echoed for centuries. The Protestant Reformation led to wars of religion, but also to new ideas of freedom and faith. The conquest of Mexico unleashed waves of colonization and cultural destruction, but also created the foundations of the Americas as we know them today. Magellan's circumnavigation tied the globe together in trade, exchange, and conflict, laying the groundwork for globalization itself. The Ottoman conquest of Belgrade shifted the balance of power, setting the stage for centuries of struggle between East and West. 1521 was not simply another year in history. It was a hinge, a point where the old world gave way to the new, the moment when local struggles became global stories, when empires rose and fell, and when the seeds of our modern age were sown.